you.
Oh,
Thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Okay, we before we start on today's session, I will just talk a bit about the assignment because evidently the secretariat said that there were a number of participants who have asked about the assignment, about the reflective paper um, in particular. So the question was, how do we write a reflective paper? Now, I would suggest that you go to the link that I have provided. When you go, when you read the outline for the assignments for the reflective paper, you will see a link there that will give you some tips as to how you can approach this to write a critical reflective paper. Now, yesterday, Jenny Murphy, in fact, touched a bit about this. She suggested, if you recall, that just jot down some ideas that you might have, your reflections of what she had presented to you yesterday, and that can, in fact, become the can become very much like the basis for the day. And every day after you listen to the session, so then think about what are the key lessons that you've got. What are the key sorts of tips that you have picked up from the session? What are some of the questions that you might have? And just jot them down. And then as you go through the days, this will be kind of incremental. So yesterday, I know that someone in the chat was pointing out that one of the key messages that she had picked up or he had picked up from Jenny Murphy's presentation was the issue to do with voice and vibration. So that could be something that you might want to elaborate or develop in your own reflective paper. So it can be anything you wish to think about. It's anything that you wish to reflect on, and then you just jot down the ideas. And every day, if you were to do this as if like you're writing in a diary, so you pick up page one, session one, and then you think about it, what had transpired in the session, and what are the things that you picked up, what are the things that you've learned, what are the things that you unlearned, what are the things that you feel that you need to pursue at greater level or deeper level, and then you just jot these things down, and as you go along, you will begin to build upon the paper. So that's the reflective paper. Do you have any questions?
No.
Anyone? Just unmute and
Uh,
speak.
Good morning, sir. This is Aman. Hello, is
Yeah,
it
good
audible,
morning.
sir?
Yeah, yeah, please go ahead.
So you said about the link. What is that link about? Where is it available, sir?
Sorry, what was that again? Can you please repeat?
You said about the link. You told us to visit.
Yeah, the link, the link my
Uh,
class, and if you read the if you read the assignment topic, you will see that read the assignment topic carefully. So when you go through that whole assignment topic, you will see a link to New South Wales University. Um, it's a link to how to write a reflective paper. So it's just a very short outline as providing you with the tips that you might need, or the tips that will help you to think reflectively.
all right, sir. Thank you
Okay,
so
and
much for the information.
You're most welcome. And Mas Idam has just provided that link in your chat.
All right, sir. Thank
Yeah,
you, Idam.
yeah. And once again, please go back, have a look at, keep my class very close to you, so that every day, check my class, because we might put in new information, we might put in, new. I think the secretariat is updating it daily, and so are the presenters. So there might be new information, there might be new readings suggested, recommended, and also there will be the recordings for each of the sessions. So please you know, do check my class on a regular basis. Check, like 2-3 times a day if possible. I do check as well, so as you would notice that it's not that we are keeping tab as to whether you are doing it or not, but if you go through the list of participants, it will give us an idea as to who is checking at what time and when was the last time that that person has been into my class. So my class is the virtual classroom, but it is a classroom where we provide you with all the kinds of information, announcements, the various sorts of recordings and readings and details about the assignment. So please do read that. The assignment is right on the top. When you scroll down from course outline, you come right to the bottom before announcements. It provides you with the assignment. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Most welcome. And anyone else? Do you have any more questions? Okay, if we don't have any more questions, now it gives me great pleasure to introduce a very close friend of mine, Michalis, Michael. He just lives very close to where I live. In fact, it's just a few kilometers from my home. And I should point out to you that my home is in Nyam, and Nyam is the Aboriginal word for Melbourne. And I live in a suburb called Bandura, and Bandura is Aboriginal for plain or flat land with kangaroos. And yes, I live amongst kangaroos, and there are lots of kangaroos. Sometimes they just hop past my home. So Bandura is this important Aboriginal place where there are kangaroos to be had, but it is also the Aboriginal name for Melbourne is Naam, Naam. And Michael is someone who I've known for quite a number of years, but I got to know him a lot better when I was in many ways like helicoptered from my anthropology position as a professor of anthropology, and the university decided to appoint me as the Center for Dialogue. And when I got to the Center for Dialogue, I realized how little I know about dialogue. In fact, I knew very little, and I felt very much like an outsider because I had to read up about dialogue. I had to, in fact, turn to Michalis all the time because he was the deputy director and I was the director. And every time I would turn to Michalis, and he would explain to me in his most patient way. And in the process, he learned a lot about being Malaysian or being Indian. And in the process, I learned a lot about being Greek. So we have formed this friendship. But today, we'll put our friendship aside. And in fact, we will talk about dialogue because over the years, as I said, I learned a lot about dialogue from Michalis. And Michalis, in fact, invited me to co-author this book with him. And all I have contributed so far is the title of the book. And I felt very much that Michalis can write this book very much on his own. So the book is entitled The Art and Craft of Dialogue. And before taking any more time out of this, what will be a very interesting presentation and all you need to know about dialogue, the art, as well as the craft of dialogue, I now like to invite Michalis Michael, or Michale Michael.
Thank you, Alvin. Now, it's always cathartic to start with a confession. Almost. I was hesitant of doing this for a number of purely self-regarding reasons. The truth be known, I largely agreed as a favor to my dear friend Albert Gomez, and I'm sure I won't regret it. Now, of course, I exaggerate somewhat in order to make a point, for dramatic effect. Honesty, truthfulness, real openness, candor, sincerity are considered all hallmarks of dialogue. It's what we expect from dialogue. It's a good word. Its frequent prolific use and misuse has seen those who value, study, and practice dialogue place qualifiers in front of it, such as genuine dialogue, deep dialogue, true dialogue, authentic dialogue. Anyway, you get the drift. Yesterday, I typed in the word dialogue in Google News and got 73,900,000 results in 0.22 seconds. Now, of course, that's not indicative of where dialogue, the word dialogue is placed. Of course, my honesty can also be an indiscretion. It could be self-indulgent, arrogant, even disrespectful. It depends in which cultural and social political context you project it. Now, a confession is followed by an admission. Already my friend Albert has revealed that I'm in the midst of writing a book titled The Art and Craft of Dialogue. Palgrave Macmillan publishes, and I better make a note of acknowledging the title idea to Albert. So I'm suffering for what is called data overflow, too much information. But has allowed me to refine and focus my material. So in that respect, there might be a benefit from it. Now, after confession and admission follows an apology. First, the technical glitches, if there's any forthcoming. This is the first time I'm sharing in Zoom, so it's the new normal. Also, in terms of the material of the presentation, if it comes across a bit Nietzschean, meaning disjointed or fragmented, bear with me because there's a method to the madness. It reflects the subject matter. Now, but let's become more methodical and disciplined. And you can see the outline, the program for today. I've pre-circulated, and I hope people have been able to see it. Now, the first session is what we can call is the theoretical component. We're going to explore some ideas and concepts.
Sorry, Michalis, I think you need to reshare the screen again.
Have I? Okay. All right, let me see. How do I do that?
The green button, the share screen. Can you do it one more time, just the same as you did before?
Yeah, let me see. Oh, here we are. Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Back?
Yes, perfect.
Good.
Thank you.
All right, people can see screen number 2 program. Now, first session, very quickly, the theoretical, the conceptual. We'll be exploring some ideas and concepts, especially from a conflict transformation, peace-making, peace-building perspective, which, after all, is the overarching theme of this experience. The second session, we're going to go into the practice of dialogue, a more utilitarian treatment of the dialogical moment, as I like to call it, and drawing on our experience of the Center for Dialogue. The third session can be loosely described as an attempt at constructing our own dialogue, and that is general discussion, questions, comments, objections, insights, etc. I'll ask people to keep notes, and let's make questions at the third session. Otherwise, we're going to eat into our valuable time. Now, all right. When I was coasting the Dead Sea on the outset of the Middle Eastern summer, on the Israeli-Palestinian side, desperately trying to find access to the actual Dead Sea, my dear friend Alex Kutab asked me in an imploring way, when are you going to get over your dialogue moment? Okay. I mumbled something to him, incoherent, as self-justification. But this question has plagued me for about 20 years, ever since we mounted the dialogue project at La Trobe University in Melbourne. This was just after 9/11, 2001, and it involved Christian and Muslim interfaith dialogue. Of course, it had nothing to do with theology, but it had everything to do with culture, conflict, and tension. So what is dialogue? That's it. Now, part of the allure of dialogue is its ambiguity. It's a confusing term. It's a flexible term. I've got a sort of a succinct definition here. People can see it. Basically, dialogue is about bringing together two or more conflicting, differing, competitive, rival, opposing ideas, situations, beliefs, behaviors, attitudes. Now, by individuals and groups, I put that in grey and in parentheses because there are many who believe that dialogue is not restricted to our species, that dialogue can be had also with other species, the animal world, but also with the natural world and even the cosmos. So this is a very interesting area that we need to bear in mind, is whether dialogue is exclusive anthropocentric or whether dialogue is, we can find dialogue in other non-sapient places. Now, let's see, yeah. Now, for over 2 decades of my dialogic moment, so to speak, I have been frequently frustrated by the need to comprehend in an articulate way dialogue as a philosophy, as a practice, as a theory, as a method, as a state of mind, plagued by doubts of dialogue's durability and effectiveness and relevance. I've often found refuge in what I consider to be the fundamental underpinning principles of dialogue, and that is truth, freedom, and respect. Now, you could substitute or add understanding, but I think that it's implied in the grouping of these three notions. Okay. Now, I was in the middle of my dialogical activity at the invite of the Damascus University in 2009, when it suddenly dawned on me that maybe I was mistaking conflict resolution for dialogue and vice versa. Why not quite the conversion on the road to Damascus? The event hold a salutary coincidence due to the due meaning conferred by the word hearing, the Greek word agour. Now, this is in reference to St. Paul's traveling companions, that hearing the voice of Jesus, for those who know the Bible. Now, the Greek word of agour, which incidentally, of course, is what the text was written in Greek, besides the meaning of hearing, it also means understanding. Now, this is very important. It's important in two respects. One is because words in different languages, especially in the original languages, don't necessarily translate into English or into our primary language. And sometimes we need to go deeper into the etymological meaning of the word to get that root meaning. Okay. Now, as you can see from the quotes, now there's a, let's see, there they are, and there's more from some very interesting characters. All the quotes, I think there's 5 of them, they all allude to a fusion of conflict resolution with dialogue in a peacekeeping or peacemaking sort of a way. It's underscored by its healing capacities. Even at a preliminary glance, it's noticeable that the emerging conflict resolution with dialogue and that it's riddled with several deficiencies. And why they say they share common characteristics, that is conflict resolution or conflict transformation for that matter. Of course, there is a difference, and I believe that you may have discussed that yesterday. They are both descriptive and prescriptive. They're both analytical and normative. They are academic and pedagogical, educational, and they operate at multi and interconnective spectrum of discourse. They involve research and engagement, and they find themselves at the crust of theory, research, and practice. Now, this is very important. Theory, research, and practice. And we'll come back to praxis a bit later. Now, another distinction that I want to point out about conflict resolution and dialogue is that the elusiveness of both discourse, that they require unpacking. Separately, the concepts of conflict and its derivative resolution and dialogue. Now, overwhelmed by a conflict resolution approach, while dialogue and conflict resolution are interconnected, they are not synonymous. We need to bear that in mind. They are not the same. They have different origins, purposes, and demeanors. The challenge is to ascertain how, when, and where dialogue and conflict resolution interconnect. From this, we come out with a common problem and challenge, and that is that both dialogue and conflict transformation, I've changed it a bit, are hard to quantify in terms of outcomes. While in the dialogical discourse, that is in dialogue, its teleological demeanor, that is focusing on the result or the outcome, is consequential to its procedural disposition. The science of politics demands solutions, outcomes, and results. Now, this is one of the challenges that I found, at least at the Center for Dialogue, when we undertook projects of community engagement or policy development, that those supporting these projects, that is those who gave us the money, the grant donors, they had expectations. They had expectations that you do something and that you produce something. That is, there are some outcomes, some deliverables, I used to call it. Now, this presented a problem for us because this was not the purpose of the dialogical experience and approach. It wasn't about starting from A, going to B, and ending up with C. It wasn't about us controlling the process. The process had to be free fall. It could derive at an outcome. It cannot. Now, when you're pressured to deliver an outcome, even subconsciously, you see yourself as a researcher or a scholar practitioner, I love that term, somehow forced into a direction and a course that's counterintuitive to the dialogical method. Now, the institutionalization of conflict resolution, there is always a danger that it will reduce dialogue to another instrument of in the facilitation toolbox that includes mediation, prevention, negotiation, conciliation, intervention, and arbitration. Now, such a reductionist view relegates dialogue to a subservient role that impedes its otherwise creative and insightful nuances that derive from its other realms: theology, philosophy, communication, literature, theatre, film, and psychology. We need to understand that dialogue is not the exclusive domain of social sciences or conflict studies or peace studies. You will find dialogue in philosophy, theology, communication, linguistics, literature, theatre, psychology. And it's, matter of fact, it is these roots that give it its value and its usefulness in the conflict transformation. Now, in reverse, while dialogue has been heralded as a progressive force fostering mutual understanding, can it really resolve conflicts? This is a question. Many have argued that dialogue, in its domestic and international manifestation, that is of civilizations, interfaith, intercultural, intercommunal, intergroup, it signifies a new paradigm in conflict resolution, human security, international relations, community engagement, multiculturalism, and public policy for practitioners and scholars alike. Now, does that elation, as displayed by our quotes, match the political performance of dialogue when deployed into a concrete conflictual setting? Obviously, this raises a further pertinent question of quantifying dialogue's success and failure. Now, in this session, I want to locate dialogue within the conflict resolution discourse and reflect on how theory, research, and practice has both informed and been informed by the dialogical inclination. But before we do that, and I'm conscious of the time, of course, I want us to start by exploring the nature of conflict itself. There are essentially two ways of looking at conflict. Now, as an indicator, to verify this, I circulated an exercise of writing 3 words for what conflict means to people, to participants. And it was coached in 2 ways. It was either coached as as a negative or as a positive. All right. Now, writing in 1951, this quaint, interesting Jewish refugee from Central Europe that found himself in Australia, at Sydney, Quincy Wright. Quincy Wright, a philosopher, viewed war as a derivative of conflict. Now, he reminds us that conflict, the word, derives from the Latin confligere, meaning to strike together. Now, while the term has acquired a moral connotation, originally it was meant in its physical sense of 2 or more different things moving to occupy the same space at the same time. The logical inconsistency in the process of solution are identical. Now, his insistence that conflict should be limited to a situation where there is an actual potential process for solving the inconsistency, that is conflict, guides us from the outset towards a resolution, a transformative disposition of conflict. Now, the other approach to conflict, the nature of conflict, is that while we tend to fear and abhor conflict, conflict is a natural and inevitable part of social and natural, as in the natural world, part of life. Now, another way to look at conflict is to try and find a win-win solution in which both sides can be benefited. Now, in this way, conflicts are turned into opportunities to grow and make things better than before. Now, this approach is a cornerstone of conflict resolution. Now, and although people have been using many conflict resolution techniques through the ages, a landmark book entitled Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In, presented in 1981 by members of the Harvard Negotiation Project, held important ideas about conflict resolution in the public's attention. Now, no, I'm going too fast. Here we are. Sorry. Now, in November 1975, one of my PhD thesis examiners edited a collection of essays on the Cyprus conflict. Now, in penning the monograph's introduction, I noticed that Van Goufoudakis, my examiner, used the subtitle, A Continuing Dialogue. Now, a few feet away from my desktop, a copy of China Daily, and there it is, ran a comment by titled 3 Decades of Dialogue. Now, despite the 45-year difference, in the midst of writing a monograph, The Art and Craft of Dialogue, which Professor Albert Gomez referred to, they understandably piqued my curiosity. How were they connected? You know, 45 years apart, different discourses, different areas. How are they connected? What did they mean by dialogue? Now, they both referred to a situation or a process of conflict. The first, the one on Cyprus, implying a negative continuum over 25 years that has brought untold misery to the people of the island of Cyprus. While the latter, that is the China Daily, used dialogue as an enabler that seeks to provide a positive image of China and the Asian relationship. Now, as a neologism, dialogue is frequently used by practitioners and scholars, like government and non-government organizations, as well as by the media. As already noted, dialogue in its granted civilizational rendition was first introduced into the international discourse by the Iranian president, Mohammad Khatami, as an antidote to Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. Now, I'm looking at the clock as we speak, and I notice that we're probably going to need to speed things up because we're going to run out of time, and there's a few things I want to touch on. Now, in locating dialogue and conflict resolution, there are a few ideas in conflict resolution scholarship that we need to be aware of that are connect with the dialogue. We forget about the fetishes of dialogue. That's a throwaway line by a colleague at La Trobe University. Applied research is more that I'm interested in here, and that is as praxis. We don't speak about how dialogue shares with conflict resolution, that it's an applied research. Now, I want to stand on the point of transferability. One of the problems of dialogue, as with conflict transformation resolution, is that dialogue and conflict transformation resolution have been tested in controlled experiments, as we call it, in workshops. Now, you see the photo there. The photo there is of a person called, for those who don't know, John Burton. Now, John Burton is one of the pioneers of conflict resolution. He was an Australian practitioner, a diplomat, who shifted from the practice of diplomacy to scholarship and conflict resolution. Now, he came up with what we know as problem-solving workshops. And he applied it to several cases, including Cyprus, Cambodia, Indonesia, etc., back in the 60s. The problem that we face with the workshops is that while you have the conflicting sides in a room and it goes through a process, the challenge is what happens after they go outside of that workshop, A, and what happens also, how do you transfer any positive outcomes or insights from the workshop into the broader community and into the broader conflict. Now, these are challenges that have plagued both conflict resolution and transformation, but also dialogue. And that's why we have controlled communication, which is also another concept pioneered by John W. Burton. Okay, yeah. 30. Now I want to go to another contribution by another scholar who also happens to be a compatriot of mine. He's a Turkish Cypriot American. He's a psychologist, a political psychologist. His name is Vamik Volkan, and he came up with the tree model. Now the tree model, as you can see, comprises of three components. He calls it the first is the psychopolitical diagnosis of a prevailing situation. So you do a diagnosis of the situation. Then you conduct the dialogues in a track 2 mode. Now the track 2, I don't know if you know about these tracks. Track 2 is, track 1 is official negotiations, talks by leaders. Track 2 is more informal. And then there's also a track 3, which is grassroots. The third branch of his tree is collaboration actions and institutions, joint projects and initiatives to emerge from the second track of his model. Now, this is important for us because when we were conducting our dialogues, and we'll talk about it in the second session, we found that you need to scope the situation, the conflict that is, which would involve profiling the communities and the parties involved, ascertaining the issues, or what others are called research in the service of peace. It's very important. Research is very important, both in conflict studies and dialogue. So we need the research and diagnosis. So he's a clinical psychiatrist. Obviously, there's a lot of medical terms that find themselves in this discourse. Then we do the dialogue, and then out of that, hopefully, you have some sort of joint, combined action project. It doesn't really matter what it is, as long as it gets them working together for a common purpose. Now, all right, let's see. All right, okay. Now, dialogical moments. Forget about the poem. 15. Now, these are some of the key thinkers of contemporary dialogue. Martin Buber, Kadamar, Bohm, Fiera, Habermas, and Khatami. All right. Now, thinkers such as these people have provided the theoretical force behind the present movement for change and have given the concept a meaning that is synonymous with intimate, communicative regimes and dispositions that promote empathy, self-awareness, and mutual understanding. Okay. Now, a critical component of genuine dialogue is a sense of what we call the suspension of thoughts, impulses, and judgments. Now, this is very important, to suspend our prejudices, our beliefs, our positions, even our values when engaging with the other. And we'll might touch upon the other is very important in the dialogical discourse. Matter of fact, the other, without the other, there can be no dialogue. It's central philosophically, spiritually, and communicatively. The other is very important. Now, suspension of thoughts involve deep introspection and an unfolding and necessarily open-ended exploration of individual and collective presuppositions, ideas, beliefs, and feelings. But you need to put yourself, if as part of the position that you are critically reflecting on your own beliefs, ideas, and feelings while engaging with the other person. It's a two-way process. Okay. Now, this is based on Katama's notion of turning towards the other and reaching for understanding. It requires authenticity, self-realization, and the acceptance of the prospect of the possibility that you can change your view, even your identity. If you are not able to accept the possibility of changing these core values, views, positions, then you can't really engage. I'm not saying you change them, but you have to accept the possibility that that might come about. Okay, so such conceptualization of dialogue requires a commitment to respectful communication and a mutual acceptance. Now, this is important, that no party, no person, no group, no culture, no religion has a monopoly on truth or wisdom. Now, most importantly, dialogue's primary purpose is about learning, not teaching. Or as Muhammad Khatami puts it, speaking and listening are a two-dimensional or multi-dimensional effort aimed at coming closer to the truth and arriving at understanding. So dialogue is more about learning, receiving, rather than teaching. Now, while constructing a framework of mutuality and commonality among people of diverse ideological and cultural backgrounds, we need to distinguish between fragmentation and difference. Now, rigid demarcation is predicated on the assumption that values and beliefs are static phenomena, insulated from external influences, and the relevant agents are incapable of reorientation. Now, we often fall into the trap of believing that values and beliefs are static phenomena, that they're set in stone, that they're internal, and they are not capable of change. That is not true. If we can't accept that values, even beliefs, are capable of change, how can we have progress, and how can we have a commonality in reaching out? Now, it should not be a surprise to us that dialogical discourse, difference is not only central, it is also synonymous with diversity and plurality. Now, difference is very important. Difference is more important than commonality, really. It should be valued as such and not seen as a negative. Okay. Now, although there is a growing understanding of the theory of dialogue, and indeed the urgent need for dialogue between cultures and faiths, the effective application of these principles is often unclear and even contested. It is nevertheless possible to identify a set of dialogical principles which lend themselves to practical application. And we will see those principles in the second session. Now, according to Habermas, very important person in dialogue, effective dialogue requires a group dynamic in which each participant has an equality of chances to take part in the dialogue, and where dialogue is unconstrained and undistorted by instrumental reasoning and administrative procedures. Now, I want to stand here and to re-emphasize this point that dialogue is a group dynamic. And even though there are 3, 4 levels in which conflict and dialogue take place, and that is, there is, well, first of all, and I'll leave aside the internal dialogue that we have within ourselves, or what is called internal monologues. That is, that voice, the doubting, the challenging of our own self within ourselves. Leave that aside. Dialogue and conflict happens at an interpersonal level, that is between individuals, an intergroup level, and then we have the what we call the international level, that is, all right? So it is a group phenomenon, dialogue. And it's important that within that group, within that space, within that dialogue, there's an equality of chances and opportunities for each individual participant and member to take place, all right? This sounds easier said than done. For one reason or another, there's always a monopoly of space and communication by agents, by cultures, by instrumentalities, by administrations, etc. Now, the more free flow you make it, and the more equal you make it for each member, especially those who are in the minority, even those who hold a contrary view, the dissenters, it's imperative that there is that freedom for everybody to participate in that. It's not only about being fair and just, it's also about allowing the ideas present themselves. Now let's see, all right, there's the obstacles, let's leave that. Okay, all right, we could read that very quickly, don't need to go through that. Okay, there's a terrorist attack, and the intercultural dialogue presents itself. It's become a catchphrase. The practice, all right, we'll leave that. How can dialogue be? All right. This is a big challenge that we'll be looking at in the second session. How is dialogue? Okay, Michalis, I know what you've done. You're trying to show off with your, oh, sorry about that. I think to miss something, but we'll see it a bit later. Let's go a bit later. And I see that we've got 12:51 and we have come more or less to the end of our session. I think there's a break. I can't hear people. So I think we have a break coming up, a 10-minute, 15-minute break. Now, we'll break here and we'll come back at, if we can come back at 12:05, 12:06, and we'll go into our second session. I promise our second session will be less convoluted than the first, as we're dealing with more practical aspects of dialogue. All right?
Excuse me, Michalis.
Can you, yes, if you can just announce your name when you're speaking.
Yes, it's me, Anna. Before we
Anna.
have a break, yes.
Yes.
Would you please briefly elaborate or highlight the key points in the intercultural dialogue that you know, like in your slide, we have no chance to read and to see what it's
Oh,
about
yes.
in intercultural dialogue? Just briefly, I don't want to take
No.
anybody's time.
Matter of fact, that's of a great assistance because I just found the slide I was looking for. And
Okay.
I'll start with that, defining concepts related to dialogue or are confused with dialogue. And it's imperative that if we can see that table here and the various notions, it's got debate, discussion, conversation, deliberation, and dialogue. And if you can see here, it's imperative that I know it can be confusing because all these, besides the fact that, besides conversation, they all start with D, we confuse dialogue with conversation, sometimes discussion, often, rarely with debate. But as you can see, they all have different meanings. And sometimes they overlap and sometimes they feed into each other. But with dialogue, it's a compound Greek word, dia and logos. Dia means through, across, between. It's not dio, it's not to. Often it gets confused with it to. And logos. Now, logos is a more tricky word to translate. It can mean word, speech, meaning, reason, gather, together. It's all often given to mean wisdom. So dialogue is the word, through the word to truth and meaning. Now, but your question was intercultural dialogue. Oh, where am I?
Yes.
Yes. And I wanted to touch on that. Now, intercultural dialogue, of course, is not intercultural dialogue, interfaith dialogue, which is more specific to faith communities and faith traditions, which has religion, of course, as the signifier. And of course, the broader inter-civilizational dialogue. Now, intercultural dialogue is about two cultures. It could be more, that otherwise might have differences or are estranged from each other, entering into a dialogue together. Now, the cultural groups, of course, can be defined and applied to any cultural groups. It has to do with group identity. So it could be about religion, it could be about ethnicity, it could be about gender, it could be about ideology or politics, it could be about, it could apply to localities, demographics. You can have the cultural group of urban people, that is people who live in the city, and those who live in the country, for example. That can constitute a cultural grouping. So mostly it's used and has acquired prominence in its interfaith demeanor because of international developments post 9/11, 2001. It has rendered itself as being a dialogue between the Christian world, let's say, and the Muslim world. Although when we were conducting interfaith dialogues, we found that it wasn't just Christian and, of course, Muslim, because within those denominations, there is a vast difference between the cultural and the religious groups. And let me bring you an example. When 9/11 broke out, all of a sudden, Australia discovered that it had a Muslim community. Now, besides the fact that it's wrong and misleading and counterintuitive to speak about the Muslim community in its singular sense, because there is such thing as a Muslim community, one. It's Muslim communities. It's so diverse and plural as the Christian communities. By reducing it to a singular community, you not only simplify, you also vilify the Muslim community or the Muslim. It becomes a problem. It's a Muslim becomes a problem, which is a lack of understanding. Now, this came primarily from the Western Christian tradition, all right? Now, I happen to come from the Eastern Orthodox Christian background. And geographically and historically, we lived with the Muslim communities and the Muslim people for millennia. So they're not new. We know them, they know us, so to speak. Now, by Eastern, I mean the Orthodox. I'm talking about the Greek Orthodox. I'm talking about the Assyrians who come from Iraq, the Copts who comes from Egypt, etc., etc., etc. Now, for us, the Orthodox, this was nothing new, but all of a sudden, Western Christianity, and thus the West, discovered the Muslim community and embarked upon the interfaith dialogues, as they say. Now, it's imperative. That's why it's very important when we talk about intercultural dialogues that we have a grasp of the participating groups, who they are. We need to do our research. We need to learn more about who the other groups are, the other cultural groups. And we all enter with some prejudices about the other cultural group, whatever it is. Now we need to condition ourselves to be open-minded and to be humble. You can't enter into a dialogue, intercultural, interfaith, all right, intergender, interecological, without a sense of humility that I enter and I know nothing about. And I have to learn, and I have to show that I respect that. I can't go in there saying, oh, you know, I know a few things and I think I know everything, okay? And vice versa. So intercultural dialogue, for me, it's imperative. Now, where it becomes, for me, problematic is where intercultural dialogue translates into the cold, real world, the political world outside, where you have to deal with interests, with power, with privilege, with resources. I don't know, Anna, if that gives you an answer.
Thank you for addressing my questions.
Yes, as I said, the challenge for me is to move beyond the celebration. You know, we get to know you, the kindness, you know, the sort of the niceties of when you meet someone. Oh, how are you? How cute? Whatever, whatever. Can come to your Easter dinner. You can come to my Easter lunch. No, that's all nice. You know, we try our food, we're accustomed, but the challenge is for interfaith dialogue now and intercultural to move beyond that and to move into the real problems that faces our societies, I suppose. What somebody called interactive multiculturalism. Berek is the scholar put forward interactive multiculturalism, which is where the challenge is. How we do it manifest in practice. Okay, Anna?
Thank you, Michalis.
You're welcome. Okay, so yeah, we can go to our break now. All right.
Yes,
sure.
Yes.
We'll be back in about, I'm trying to see where the program is.
15 minutes.
15 minutes. So that's 1:15, 1:16. Let's say 1:15. Okay.
That's Melbourne time, but
well,
in,
time. Yes,
Indonesian time, it's 10:15.
10:15.
Masuk, Mas.
For Indonesia. Can people hear me?
Very nice, Michalis.
Now, now I understand. I understand that we had a visual problem with sharing, with a PowerPoint. I hope that's been rectified and people have a big enough image of the presentation rather than some small little icon. I presume that we're on track. Now, just procedurally, please raise all the issues and very good points that have been raised in the chat room about the presentation, about the issues, the omissions, and the problems, because they're all pertinent. Understand that, yes, a lot of the theorists, unfortunately, because of the chronology, have been men, and there is one of the issues in dialogue is that this is about men's business, that the women and the gender perspective doesn't have equal presence. Now this became an issue in real terms, in terms of our community dialogues here in Melbourne and elsewhere, and it's an issue that in a chapter that needs to be discussed, and to be discussed in a way of why is this the case, and what other or additional alternative interventions could be done to address this imbalance. Now, I'm starting off with two quotes. I think that's, yep, here we are. And I don't have any notes, so I'll be going with you. When in Melbourne, as I said, the Central Dialogues, we conducted a series of community dialogues. They were really dialogues about diasporas in conflict and diasporas in dialogues. We were in a unique place in Melbourne to be a very multicultural, multi-ethnic society. So every community, every religious group that exists in the world has a presence here. Not just a presence, they have their own structures, they have their own system, their own space. So we often have found that communities whose original homelands are in conflict had very little to do with each other once they were in Melbourne, even though they shared a common space. They lived in the same neighborhoods or suburbs, they went to the same schools, they worked in the same places. Beyond the individual level, that is a person to person, there was very little group to group interaction. We found this very interesting and also worthwhile intervening to see whether we can bring them together in a safe, secure space. That item. Now, one of them, of course, one of the divided communities was the Sri Lankan communities. So we brought together Sinhalese and Tamils predominantly. They're the two binary big groups that are the conflict. Of course, there are Burghers and also Muslims, but the big groups that define the conflict were the Tamils and the Sinhalese. And unlike the homeland, where the Sinhalese are the majority numerically and politically, and Tamils are minority, here there is a parity in terms of presence. In one of them, you have this quote, "Who are we kidding? Let's call a spade a spade. There are terrorists amongst us." This was a very an accusation that was made, and always to avoid this sort of attack, because it wasn't made to an individual, although he had an individual in mind, we thought that let that be aired in order to trigger the response and see how they could go through it and how they can unpack it. And matter of fact, what is for one person a terrorist, another is a freedom fighter. Now I'm trying to see whether I can go to the second slide. All right, here we are. Now, in a similar vein, we did an Afghanistan community dialogue, which a few years later. Of course, Afghanistan, very important for Australia and for the world, given the Afghanistan war. We are not divided. It's only a fringe group that's creating trouble. It's just that we invite them and they don't come. This is a frequently stated response to why we're not involved. They don't engage in dialogue, or they justify a more adversarial behavior to each other. Now, we did the practice of dialogue. Why dialogue? Who takes place? Who takes part? What are the principles? What are the possibilities? What are the limitations? Okay, forget about the film. Now we said what dialogue is. Just run it very quickly because there was a discrepancy with the previous presentation. As you can see what it means in Greek word, a process of sharing and developing meaning. It's not a method as such of resolving conflict. That it's imperative that we understand that it's not result driven. Results can come out of it, but it shouldn't be driven by the results. It's one of the our guidelines as facilitators, let's say, of mounting these dialogues, these community dialogues, that we used to say to each side. Now, I'll step back a bit on that and say that before you enter a dialogue, we did consultations. That is, before we brought groups together, after we've done our research, after we've done our scoping, after we mapped the communities and their terrain, we then had consultations with the individual groups and communities first. We did that for two reasons. One is for familiarity, for them to get to know us and us to get to know them, to air their issues and their positions that concern them, because they're not the same. They could be different from us for the Sinhalese or the Hazaras than they are for the Tamils and the Pashtuns, for example. Okay? So we need to open a list, if you like. So Hazaras, what are your issues? This, and the other. We do the same with the Pashtun, and then we devise what a program or a frame. But what we used to say to them is that, listen, as far as the process is concerned, that's our domain, the dialogue process. As far as the content is concerned, that's your domain. So it can go anywhere you like. It can go nowhere. It's up to you, and it's up to the dialogue, basically. Now that fits with the conflict transformation idiom of ownership of the conflict. That is, that the parties involved in the conflict should own the conflict, and that should be respected by any third party. Okay. Aims of dialogue: take full advantage of the cultural and religious diversity of neighborhoods, societies, regions, and the world. Now, to promote the spirit and practice of dialogue between different faiths, cultures, and political systems. Now, I should add there also that this is a bit restrictive. The other main divider that we were confronted with, and we didn't know it until a bit later, is the gender divide. This turned out to be very much men's business, as somebody has called it, and rightly so, is that unfortunately the structures in the diaspora, that is the structures of these communities, are run by men, and not just men, middle-aged men and elderly men. This is the characteristic of organized communities, okay, in Australia, but also elsewhere. It is that the establishment, the structures are inundated and have been for centuries by men. And therefore, what we had a problem of trying to redress that, not only in terms of participation, but also in terms of issues and discourse. We really had a problem in finding women, and especially young people, to participate. They weren't interested, or they weren't available. We went some way. We made it an issue so the others are aware of it. And to be fair, most were. And where we could, we sought alternative approaches. Matter of fact, I recall that with the Afghanistan dialogues, there was a separate supplementary, just women dialogue, women, Afghan, Pashtun and Hazara. And I think that that worked very well. It didn't go to the extent that we wanted to address this problem. But I have to say that in terms of funders, our funders, most of our funders, if not all, made this as a reporting requirement. Is what were the problems? Did you have adequate gender, youth and other representation? And if not, why not? So they didn't just say, oh, well, you know, why you didn't have, let's say, 50% women in your groups? What were the issues? So, and what did you do to address that? This is a perennial problem that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about intercommunal dialogue. Okay. Now, key principles of dialogue. I've mentioned it in the first session. All right. Search for truth, imperative. Listening as well as speaking. Khatami put it very, very eloquently, that it's more important to listen than to speak. It is a journey. Dialogue is a journey to discover the other, whoever the other is, but also to discover yourself in the process. It's a sort of a double mirror effect. That is, you look into the mirror and there's a mirror behind you and there's all this reflectiveness. Or looking into the river is the analogy that's been used by the Buddhist, is that you look into the river and the river looks back at you, etc. So it's that sort of reflective process that it's a journey, because the river also travels. It's not static. The water is different, but it is the same. Now, sorry. Let's see, I've got a problem here trying to go back. Here we are again. Now, although we value what we have in common, and this is very important, and there's a lot of things that we have in common, that's why we enter into dialogue, we also need to value our differences. Matter of fact, it's the differences that in many ways are more important, because there are differences that frame the question. And if anything, dialogue's about questions. It's not about answers, it's about questions. It's the question that leads us to a dialogue and to a discussion and to a search. So differences need to be identified and need to be valued. The sharing of memories of past. The past, of course, is history. It's also spatial. Acknowledging and experiencing the pain of the other. It's another key principle that, and again, the other could be anyone. It doesn't need to be the conventional other. The other is anybody who's not like us or like me. It could be, okay, so we need to keep that, that in mind. We can't be selective and say, oh, you're the other, or this group is the other, but not the other group. We ignore it, or it doesn't have a presence. And many others don't have a presence in our understanding of dialogue. But acknowledging the other's pain and problem is imperative. And sometimes it's that lack of acknowledgement of existence and of pain that leads to other forms of expression. Okay, and the last one is, if we get this, to work together. Now, it's a good principle, it's the last principle, but you have to go through this journey and see whether you can generally meet together to work for something that is in common for the social need. I mentioned that in our dialogues, it was the apex of the dialogue. If they arrive, not if I drive them, if they arrive to a common project or a common activity. It might not take place because there's always external factors that intervene. In a couple of our dialogues, I remember one was the Jewish, Israeli, Arab, Palestinian one. They came close to an outcome, but unfortunately, there was the Gaza war occurred, and of course, everything collapsed. Same with Sri Lanka. The Tamils and the Sinhalese communities, or the representatives or the leadership who were there, they came up with a joint statement, matter of fact, and they identified two joint activities. One was to have a cultural social night and to raise funds for, they wanted to build a clinic somewhere in North Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, there was the push by the Sri Lankan army. One said, how can I break bread with my Sinhalese brothers and sisters when my relatives are being slaughtered? So obviously that collapsed because of external intervention. That will happen a lot. Now, what can dialogue do? It could avoid the pitfalls of reaction and reactionary politics. Again, even when the war in Gaza in the Middle East was taking place, we insisted that dialogue is most needed at these trying and conflicting times, is trying to keep the communication going. And I'll refer to another incident. This has to do with another community, the Egyptian community. And when I say Egyptian community, it was along the lines of the Coptic and Muslim communities, Egyptian communities here in Melbourne. Now, I don't know if some of you remember, there was this big issue. There was this Coptic American who produced this film about the Prophet, not, you know, it was an offensive film about the Prophet Muhammad. And it was, you know, one of those YouTube, I think, makeshift job. And obviously it was a great reaction from Muslims around the world, and equally from here in Sydney. Matter of fact, some demonstrated and there were clashes with police, and one demonstrator even lighted themselves on fire. Now, we were concerned that this would come to Melbourne, and we were conducting the Egyptian dialogues between the Coptic leaders, community leaders, and the Muslim Egyptian leaders. Now, because there was this dialogue, they were able to hold a joint press conference. It was on live on TV. I was at the Melbourne airport to catch a flight out, and I saw, to my amazement, on Sky of all places, live a press conference, and there was Professor Camilleri, who used to be the director of the Centre for Dialogue before Albert Gomez, and the leaders of the two communities together, the imams and the bishops, and etc., calling for calm and for their communities not to react, and etc. And matter of fact, nothing happened. Now, whether the dialogue itself had something to do with that appeal and for people adhering to that appeal for calm, in a sense, I don't know. But the point is that in times of tension and violence, the dialogical infrastructure could lend itself as to avoid the reaction or reactionary politics or politics of hate. Now, okay. Now, in dialogue, participants, we said about respect the other, celebrate value, contribution of each other's faiths. This is important that we recognize the value and the contribution that the various cultures make and the various groups make, and not just that my group or my faith or my club, for example, is better than yours. That there is acknowledgement and respect of the value that they all bring, contribute. And we talked about nobody's got a monopoly on wisdom and truth. Listening and speaking, and what we share in terms of ethics. Now, this is all cultural groups, all community groups share the same ethical thread, and that is that the goodness, respect, assistance, humility. So sometimes we need to remind ourselves that our values, these human values of humanity really, is override our differences and our prejudices. Difference is a source of enrichment, and that at times these different faiths, cultures, and communities can give rise to mistrust, suspicion, hostility, and even violence. Now, this is a challenge, of course, that we've seen and we see quite frequently. Now, I want to stand at empathizing. I've always said that we need to empathize with the other. It doesn't mean that you adopt the other's position or values or beliefs. It means that you empathize, that if you were in the same shoes as the other, in the same circumstances, that you will behave the same way as they do. And to empathize with them, especially those who are going through pain, suffering. Now, without that empathy, we can't go to the next step, and that is the healing and the reconciliation. Okay, now, key requirements. We need to have faith in people and respect the dignity of the human person. We need to be sensitive. Need enthusiasm and energy a lot. Perseverance. Need to be persevere. I mean, dialogue and conflict transformation needs perseverance. You've got to persist. It's easy to get disheartened or to get disappointed. And we also need a knowledge of the issues and the situations. There is a learning, and we mentioned that, a learning aspect to dialogue. Contacts and connections, people-to-people skills, organizational skills. This is something that usually gets dropped off, that there's a lot of organization, there's a lot of administration involved in conducting these dialogues and these group activities. Now, let's do it. Okay. Now, who can implement dialogue? First and foremost, dialogue is an ethical approach. You would have gathered that by now. There's a long list. There is a tradition, a philosophy behind it. It is primarily an ethical approach, and it can be implemented by anyone and at any level. It doesn't need specialists. You can do it in your classroom, in your neighborhood, your workplace, your family. Dialogue could be very rewarding if sustainable. Another challenge to dialogue is sustainability. Once people, because it's very time consuming, it demands energy, it demands resources, it demands time from people, and people are busy, people will move on. Yes, in our interventions, I found that once we've done the dialogues and we left them, the concern is that are the communities or the individuals, are they willing, capable to continue without us as facilitators, and as facilitators, you know, we had the resources, we had the staff, we got money, we had backers to continue to ring them, to arrange things, to book things. Now, would they be able or willing or, to continue that with that once we pull out as a third party? We found that in a lot of cases, it didn't happen. At best, the personal contacts that they made and friendships with each other linger on, and therefore, once they withdraw back to their world and to the community, the real world, that when something happened, they were capable of reaching out to each other and a back channel communication to derive at something. The flow of meaning, dialogue takes place, as you can see, and I'm trying to see what the time is. We have a bit of more time. Flow of meaning, both sides need to be actively engaged, both sides need to have a desire to understand. Now, the right moment. Another challenge is whether both sides are willing to engage in dialogue. There is also another factor to this that's common to conflict transformation and conflict resolution, and that is called the asymmetry dialogue. That is when you're dealing with, not all sides are equal in the sense of resources, power, but also causes. The most famous of them, of course, has been our attempt to bring Israelis and Palestinians together, you know, here in Australia, but also elsewhere, and that the Palestinians claim that no, the normalization of relations is a political act, and that this normalization favors the occupier, which in this case was Israel for them, and disadvantage the Palestinians, who are the minority or the weaker party and the disenfranchised party. Now, I could see that point as a third party and a facilitator, and as someone that's been involved and connected with the Palestinian cause for decades, and therefore the response from my friend Alex, when are you going to get over your dialogical moment? Meaning, you know, I mean, this dialogue thing is really washy, and it's good for, you know, to make feel good, but really when it comes to the real conflict, how does it help the Palestinians? We give in, we make a concession by entering into the dialogue. What concessions are the Israelis doing? Now, on one hand, this is a very state-centric approach, that's fair enough, but on the other, we're all part, or they're all part of a grouping and a structure that underpins this conflict. It's something that's that can present itself as an obstacle for bringing parties together, even though you coach them that, well, you know, these are informal conversations. These are not formal meetings or dialogues or workshops. And at the best, when you bring the groups together, this becomes an issue that needs to be, of course, openly discussed and aired. And for the other side, whoever the other side is, the Israelis, the Jews, the Sinhalese, the Pashtun, etc., they need to understand that this is a real issue for them. And probably number one, how do you deal with the power factor? How do you deal with the asymmetry in the positions of the two groups? These are question marks. The same applies with our gender imbalance. Women say, you know, that there's been centuries of structural inequalities you control the institutional infrastructure. This is an asymmetric dialogue or engagement. Now, men need to understand that and need to come up with ways and means of addressing this structural inequality and imbalance. Okay, these are challenges. Okay, now to engage in dialogue, we must measure and control our reaction and views and positions that we may regard. Civility, okay, civility is imperative. Civility, if people can't accept that they enter, they need to be civil and respectful to the other side and other individuals who hold opposite views or represent dire violators, then then we tell them that you don't come, don't enter, you're not invited, because if you can't have that basic attribute being respected, that we're going to be civil to each other, then there is nothing to be gained by shouting or by fighting or by arguing, because you won't accept the other's point of view or to receive it. And to understand why they hold such views. And it's all there. All right, we can implement dialogue, we said that. Okay. And this leads us to why conflict in views should not stifle dialogue. Now, it's easier said than done. I mean, it's easier to say that you need to accept the direst opposing view to what you hold sacred for decades, that defines your core. This is the challenge, that to be willing, genuinely and openly, to enter into a dialogue with the other, who is the dire antithesis to your core beliefs and practice. And conflicting views should not be hidden. We've touched upon that. Insincere politeness is untruthful and usually leads to misunderstanding. There's no use of going into a dialogue and have insincere politeness because it's not grounded in truthness. And we all have a persona, and we all are polite to one another. Now, I suppose what we need to do, and this is a process, we need to be aware of that and try and turn it around, or try and transform insincerity to sincerity. And we've got there, the true politeness recognizes differences and seeks to clarify and understand them. Okay. All right. Avoid polarization. Again, this is clarification. Don't be offensive. Don't be defensive. Don't say, I don't mean to be rude, but you do. Once you say that the dialogue has become polarized, dialogue that ends up like a shouting match in the schoolyard. You're not being fair. Yes, I am. No, you're not. You're not willing to accept the facts, etc. You know the discourse. Now, that's not dialogue. There's no meaning flowing from this exchange. Because we're trying to score points, it becomes a political exercise. It can become advocacy. It could become campaigning. It could be lobbying, but it's not dialogue. Okay? And we usually end up with, oh, well, I've had enough. This is a complete waste of time. I'm withdrawing. This is the last refuge of the non-dialogical. But we are human, and we all find ourselves in these pathological moments. Okay. How are we looking for time? I think we're there. 1:52. We have about 8 minutes before our next break. Any questions? The third session is a general discussion, so we can utilize the 8 minutes that we have for some questions. Anyone? I can't hear.
Hi, Professor Michalis. I'm Tuba Ahmed. I have a question. May I?
Yeah, I can't hear you. Who is it?
Tuba Ahmed.
Yes, Kuba.
Sir, as you mentioned that dialogues should be purposeless, like without any agenda or without any target, just for the meeting. But when we see at state level or international level, even in the organization, dialogues help to get an agenda, to achieve any target, any political or economic target. That is the basic reason to help the dialogue between two conflicted parties. Or so my question is that, isn't the purposeless dialogue or agendaless dialogue is just meeting of people and developing a relationship between people?
No, good point. No, I mean, when I say not agenda in the sense that it has a goal in mind to be reached. That
Yes,
is
exactly.
a solution. Dialogue is not about solutions. For that, you have conflict resolution. Conflict resolution, as the word says, is about problem solving. There is a problem. We need to solve. Let's find a solution. So the solution guides the process. In dialogue, it's reverse. It's the process that guides any outcome.
Isn't dialogue, sir, isn't dialogue is the way to get to achieve conflict resolution or resolve any conflict between two parties?
It can
dialogue
be, but it's not.
Tool.
No, it can be, and it's being used, but it's not its prime purpose to problem solving. Okay.
Then what's its prime purpose?
Its prime purpose is communication, understanding the other.
Okay.
It's closer to transforming the problem or the conflict. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
No. It's a very important point that we get confused, and we get confused especially when we try to put dialogue in practice. It's easier said in theory than in practice, because in practice, as you said, we have a dialogue because there's an issue. Usually, that's what there's a point of disputation, which again is that's not what dialogue is supposed to be about. It's about dialogue should be an everyday occurrence. It should be a state, a way that we communicate and understand each other. But in terms of intercommunal dialogues, because you're dealing with groups or intergroup dialogues, groups have their own dynamics. Groups are not just about a bunch of individuals. Common history. A group also has structures and institutions. It's when it comes to how does dialogue deal with institutions, whether it's organizations, whether it's a state, whether it's whatever, that bureaucracies to these hidden walls of conformity, because there are pressures and there are limitations that we can see or hear, and there are those that are inherent that we can't see. So when we go into a room for dialogue, not everybody is equal, even though we say, because Michalis might be, a community leader and I'm just whoever I am, because once we step out of that room, then the reality, the real world kicks in, and that affects the internal dialogue or the internal space. What we try to do in a dialogue, as in conflict transformation, is that to develop a secure and equal space for everybody to participate as equals. That's easier said than done, because there's a big chasm between theory and practice. Now, in terms of agenda, I didn't mean that we don't have a program, and then we have an issue to discuss. We don't have a solution. The solution is not what drives the dialogue. because you've got conflict resolution for that. It's something different. It's something to do with relationships and about changing the culture and the structures, if possible, that of the conflict.
Thank you, Professor Michael.
Thank you. Okay. Somebody.
Professor? Yes, I would like to make a comment.
Yes, Alexandra.
Yeah, Alejandra. Thank you.
Jay is silent.
Right.
No, it's a sort of yes. Yes.
You have addressed the lack of women in dialogue theorists. Actually,
yes.
It was John who pointed out before I did.
Mm-hmm.
But you also were talking about the absence of women in public dialogue and the dialogue which is seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking that when women are taking different roles in the tribes or in different roles in the cultures, they're the one to keeping the kids alive. They keep the food. They keep the earth.
Yes.
Women they have such an important role when men are not present in the tribes or even negotiating when men are absent. And they have an important role as peacekeepers and peace constructors. That's why they steal the spoils of war, and their body steals object of men's desire to be taken and aggressed. So you were saying that dialogue could be held with other species, not only with human beings and with the earth, with the ground, with the animals. Wouldn't you consider that a kind of role or a kind of dialogue, a hidden one, the one that women undertake, a hidden one, not a public one, but still a dialogue?
Of course. What I pointed out is that when it comes to institutionalized dialogue or institutionalized conflict transformation, it is my experience, at least with Australia, but also elsewhere in other conflict resolution cases, it's primarily dominated by men and middle-aged men. Now, the point, and this is considered the main game, you know, this is the real game, because it has to do with power, it has to do with resources, it has to do with politics, okay? Now, what we found is that it just trying to get try and get women, token presence into this dialogue, the institutional dialogue, wasn't it was counterintuitive. Yes, that was one aspect to redress that imbalance, which, if you ask me, the only way to redress is to have 50% women and 50% men, or even 51% women and 49%, whatever it is, but there to be parity, real parity, okay? The other mechanism that was tried is to have a separate dialogue just for women, by women, with no men. And we discovered that the issues, the tempo and the temperament in a all-women dialogue was totally different to the other one that was the mainstream or the establishment, the institutionalized one. Now, the challenge is how to reconcile these two different processes, both not organizationally, but in terms of ideas, and bearing in mind the power factor. This is what we were concerned about. How do we to address the power imbalance in real terms?
Right.
And you said that you pointed out the interspecies. Now that was a question. The question is whether dialogue is exclusively the domain of Homo sapiens. There are theorists and ecologists who say, no, you can have a dialogue between ideas. You can have a dialogue between concepts or trends even. And this is fascinating. You can have a dialogue between poetry. In literature, there is, which is an interest, it's the ideas that can be transferred from one text to another without the assistance of the human agency, if you like. And this is what fascinates me. You can have a dialogue in mathematics. I mean, question mark, can you? If a dialogue is between two opposing or different ideas or forces, then why not? You don't need, humans become the agency of the dialogue rather than the force of the dialogue. What I found from the all women's dialogue of this community, and bearing in mind we're talking about a community that is in conflict, the conflict diaspora, is that yes, what were more pressing for them were issues to do with the family, with children, with everyday real domestic issues in the sense of a household. In some cases, it had to do more with land. This is another thing that fascinated me, is that the role of land, ecology, nature for those communities that come from a rural background versus those who come from a urban city background. Even if they are diasporic in the sense that they've been living in Australia for decades, the fact that their identity was formed because of their village or their they come from, nature is more important to them, even here in Australia in the diasporic context. And this is what when we talk about intercultural, we need to factor in that it's not just about religion and customs. It's also to do with gender. It's also to do with regionality. It's also to do with demographics. It's also to do with of course class and socioeconomic factors. So we shouldn't be restrict culture just to, you know, religion, customs, and ethnicity. Yeah, we need the notion of culture is much broader, at least for me anyway. Okay.
Hello, Professor.
Yes. Are we taking a break or we're moving straight in?
I have a question. I'll take it after break.
Okay. You can wait for the break?
Yes, I'll break.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's take a break and come back at Melbourne time. I won't do it's 11, isn't it? In Indonesia. Well, anyway, in 15 minutes.
So we'll come back 11:20, Prof.
11:24 your time, yes. 11:24. Okay, thank you. Irfan, you've got your hand up. Okay. That's better.
Hi, Professor. I have a question before break. Can I
Yes,
ask
please. Can you your name? Say your name. Yeah, I can see some of you, but not all of you.
Okay. I am Nidhi from India.
Okay, Nidhi, that's good. Your question?
Yeah. I want to...
Nidhi, sorry, let me interrupt. Before we do that, can people see the slide here? 39?
Yes.
Okay. Q&A, question and answer. Then we're going to break out into 7 groups of 5 people, okay? For 15 minutes, Ari's arranging that. And the 7 groups are going to dialogue this question: how has COVID-19 changed the world? And after 15 minutes, we all come back to the main session and each group will give us a report. But let's start with your question.
Okay, Professor, thank you. I want to, it is an extension question of what Tuba asked before break. You said that dialogue shouldn't have agenda, it should be free of mind. The purpose of dialogue is to listen and maybe, feel connected. But isn't it the first step towards conflict resolution? So if it is the first step towards conflict resolution, then it should have an purpose and aim.
No, the purpose isn't so much, it's not about resolving the conflict. Resolving the conflict in the narrow solution terms. It's not about a problem solving exercise. You have a problem and it needs to be resolved, and it's not, dialogue doesn't do that. It can do that, but it's not, that's not its prime purpose. Its prime purpose is not to solve the problem. It can contribute to solving the problem, but not solve the problem. That's conflict resolution. The reason why we say that is because when you're in a conflict resolution state of mind, okay, the whole discourse, the whole process, if you like, is guided by reaching a solution. And if that's the case, it can become very rigid. So anything that doesn't seem to be resolving that problem from a narrow sense, from a political sense, is rendered irrelevant. You're wasting time. It's got nothing to do with this. Okay, you're out of order, if you want to put it in a meeting context. How many times have we heard in a meeting in the parliament that a speaker says something that has nothing to do, or might seem to have nothing to do with the problem, and they say, you're out of order. It's got nothing to do with, it's irrelevant. This is not dialogue. That's a different discourse. This is conflict resolution. And about listening, what I said is that in dialogue, it's as important as speaking. Matter of fact, some say that listening is more important than speaking. We all have a propensity, and I'm as guilty as anyone, to love the sound of our own voice. We start to believe our own propaganda. It's a human frailty that well, there's two frailties when it comes to talking. One is that we think we've got all the answers, or second is that we pathologize our differences. We personalize our differences. If I disagree with you on something, then I personalize it. We have difficulty in detaching our disagreement from the person. So it's Michalis. Michalis is, it becomes a part of Michalis' persona that he supports Manchester United, for example, instead of Liverpool, okay? We are not able to separate, we have difficulty in depersonalizing, depathologizing our differences. And afterwards, I will cast my impression of Ari, for example, because this could be the intellectualization of our differences, as it's been called, is a very hard notion to implement. And dialogue seeks to take that edge out of that, the hate out of polarization, the polarization out of differences. That's what we mean about a dialogue when it comes to listening, hearing, but also in terms of process versus outcome. I don't know if I've clarified or confused matters even further.
No, but you've instigated some new thoughts into it, so maybe that's, we'll think about and work upon it. Thank you.
And that's what it's all about, introducing new insights, new thoughts, even if they're, sometimes we don't get a chance to consider them.
Right.
Yes. And it works both ways. You see, your questions and your input help me to look at things that I haven't seen. I mean, we don't have all the answers. If Socrates can say that he knows nothing, then obviously we should be humble enough to be able to realize our limitations and to be open to new experiences, new perspectives, and new attitudes.
Professor, I'm Tuba again.
Yes. Tuba.
Yes, Tuba. So can we say that, like other peace exercises, dialogues are like only for civilians or civil societies or NGOs, not for the decision makers? Because decision makers make decision in the closed room with limited interaction with the other party. So can we say that?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question, because that's one of the points that I left out. Personally, I believe that that you can't have dialogue with instrumentalities. Personally, because instrumentalities are automated, innate entities. They're not capable, not yet anyway. It's like the debate I was reading about whether machines have the capacity do they have a consciousness? Would they ever develop a consciousness? And leaving science fiction aside, how can you have instrumentalities of power or bureaucracies, organizations even, engaging in dialogue if they don't have the capacity of self-doubt and criticism and reflection? This is a good question. See, one of the requirements when we approached our community dialogues was to say to people, you're coming here in your personal capacity. You're not here as a representative. You're not here as a representative of your organization, your state, your association. You might be the president or the secretary or the CEO. This is not how you come here. You come here as an individual. And the reason we say that is to liberate them from any constraints and restraints they have as office bearers. Because when you're an office bearer, you have to be accountable to a collective, to a process, to an institution. You're not there as Michalis, you're there as, I don't know, representative of the Center for Dialogue, as the director of the Center for Dialogue. So when I say something, I need to clarify that, no, this is my personal view. I'm not speaking as the director of the Center for Dialogue and therefore the Center for Dialogue. This is my personal view. And therefore I'm liberated from that constraint that I need to report and to get direction from my organization or my entity. So I would tend to probably agree with you that I don't think you can have a dialogue between track one or instrumentalities. But that's something that could be discussed. You can have conflict resolution, of course, and there has been. You can even have informal track one-ish or 1.5, but I don't know if you can have a dialogue or the type that we're saying. Now, of course, saying that, how do you merge what you're doing and what's happening in the track one, what's happening in the power-centric world, the political world? How do you reconcile? How do you transferability, as I mentioned before, from one domain to the other? It's just a question. I don't have the answer yet, and I doubt if I will. Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
That's all right.
Do you mind if I come in?
Yes. Who's this?
My name is Toshi.
Oh, yes, Toshi.
Thank you very much. The relevant question is, so I am mediating the neighbor conflict, that is the one household and the neighbor. And then I fully understand. I fully agree with your presentation, previous presentation, the key points for mediation or for dialogue. Do you apply a different approach? Do you take a different approach to a group dialogue, or it's the same? What you have said to us, it applies to one-to-one and then group to group.
I think that different dynamics exist for different levels of interaction in terms of conflict, but also dialogue. There's a different, I mean, there is also the additional level, or the first level of internal. We do have a dialogue internal. I believe this, that there is a dialogue within us. So we have dialogues all the time within us. Sometimes we externalize them. Sometimes we reflect them. Sometimes we internalize interpersonal, intergroup, international, intercosmic dialogues, and they become internalized. And this is very important to recognize. The challenge here is whether are we trying to duplicate the various levels of dialogue, and this is where you touch on. Now, in terms of, let's say, neighborhood or neighborhood disputation, I assume that's what the case study is yes, there's usually, it falls more into the sphere of conflict resolution and conflict transformation, in the sense that there is a set of issues involved here, of differences. I presume that what instigated your intervention mediation is that there's been an issue, and usually it's a negative issue. There's some point of disputation, and therefore, if they can't resolve it, then that's very mature of them to call an outsider. Oh, I don't know whether you volunteered it, but to try and mediate, because many times we are very stubborn and we don't like other people mediating because we think we're right and they're wrong, and therefore we're trying to impose our right on their wrong. Now, in that case, of course, this is a conflict resolution. There's a problem that you're going to try and resolve. That's immediate, of course. But the transformative aspect of that conflict is that once the issue gets resolved, once the problem gets resolved, or it gets resolved amicably, meaning that both sides agree to it, it's the challenge then becomes, all right, how do they embrace that solution, that outcome, in a way that they both benefit out of it, but also that it improves the strained relationship between the two neighbors. And this is where the transformative aspect comes in, of changing that relationship from one that was bickering neighbors to being good, friendly neighbors. In that case, a dialogue or elements of the dialogue come into play, and that is, okay, you need to, neighbor A, you need to understand where your neighbor B is coming from, but really coming from the real issue, not the pretend one. I put one up, you know, that a lot of times in conflicts, there's the real issues or the real needs, let's say, that they have, and the artificial or the misperceived interest. It might be that my problem or my issue is more, my interest is not a real interest, but it's what I think it is, it's perceived. To unfold that, you need a dialogue. And I need to realize it for myself. There's no use of you telling me, because I'll get offended, but also I'll just say, yeah, you're right or you're wrong. I need to come to that conclusion, which applies to both your neighbors. But that is a process that needs to takes time, and it's a sustain, and it goes through phases. You can't have a dialogue. A dialogue is a lifelong commitment. Life is a dialogue, if you like. I know I'm sounding a bit like a postcard, but anyway. So in that respect, there are dialogue. A dialogue could be useful if your neighbors decide and they want to continue. And because they live next to each other, it's unavoidable. I mean, we live next to each other, so we might as well, we are forced by circumstances and our conditions to live with each other. So we might as well do it in a positive way, in a good way, that it doesn't create all the tensions and the angst and the negativity. But there are issues that need to be resolved to reach that both sides need to accept that this solution or this resolution is a fair one and one that I can live with, but also that the solution of those problems leads to a better relationship.
So would you, is this what you have said applies to group as well?
Now, group to group, yes. I mean, there are groups and groups, by the way. There are outside of ourselves where we evolve with groups. Our family is a group. Our neighborhood is a group. Our community, whatever that community, is a group. Our society is a group. Our nation is a group. So there are groups and groups, and they do differ. The transferability into a group dynamic is different because you have to deal with you have to do with individuals as part of that group. And the question of consensus and agreement comes in. Now, dialogue is not about reaching a consensus, and it's not about a group, it's not a decision. So we are forced in groups. We might be a minority of one in a group, and we feel the pressure that we are compelled to agree with the majority. Now, in dialogue, this is an antidote to dialogical, because in many respects, the voice, the dissent of the one is a very powerful voice and should be respected and not be forced into compliance. And with groups, these operate. Now, how can you take a group from a position of opposition and conflict to one that is more dialogical? It can be done, harder. It's a different process. It's much more multi-leveled, all right? But to do that, you need to get the group in a room, in a space where it is allowed to function. This is a contradiction. On one hand, you want the group to retain its solidarity of identity as a group, but on the other hand, you want that group to fracture. You don't want it to be homogeneous. You want it to be diverse and plural. Because if you look over the fence of your neighbor, if neighbor A looks over the fence of neighbor B, he will see that the neighboring family is bickering, they have differences, they're not as united as you thought. Now, that might seem as a weakness, but for conflict resolution and for dialogue, it's a strength, because it shows you, well, you know, they're not a homogeneous, solid unit. They have different views and interests and behaviors, so they're divided. And that division is the element of diversity. And I would say democracy. Yeah, I'll take it a bit further because I want to make a dramatic point. So I don't know if that helped you.
Thank you very much.
Michalis, I think
we're ready?
Yeah, for the time, I think we should probably get into the breakaway.
Okay, now the organizers have organized you into 7 groups of 5, I believe. Okay, now you will go into your breakout rooms. You're going to have 15 minutes. So we come back at what is it? 11:45. Is that correct, Albert?
Yes.
11:45.
Yeah. So we'll come back at noon, and then you have about 10 minutes of the group report.
Yes. Now the question here is, how has COVID-19 changed the world? Okay. Now you go off. You have your dialogue around that question. and then we'll get the groups come back to the general session and give us a report of what transpired. That's about it, right?
Okay.
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 So,
Zikri.
Yeah, Zikri.
Okay.
Zikri, you want to stop the recording for this?
A gap in my studies after I started working. So that's how I started, and that break was very good for me. And secondly, that I learned the sense of care for others. I used to be careful towards my family member, but the extended family from where I belong to. So I try to help people, try to tell them the myths that are associated with the care and everything. So so that's something which is changed.
Okay. So I think the time is already in, done. I'm left for apart. I think it's time for the group report or something like that.
Okay. Welcome back. Are we? We're in the group's report, are we?
Michalis, can you stop your share screen so that we can have the whole?
Can I stop it? I think I can. Let me see.
Yeah. Just close it. Okay, great. So we now
close now.
Yeah. So we have the whole gallery of those.
Well, I don't, but I've got you. But anyway.
Just
okay.
Okay. Gallery view.
Gallery view. That's better. Is that
okay.
It?
All right. So you have you can see everyone now.
Well, mostly everyone.
Pretty much, yeah. You just need to move the screen up and down.
5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 25 boxes according to.
Yes.
Okay.
So all right. It's quite
now.
Okay, ready? Yeah.
Yes, but we're moving into the reports or feedback, let's say. Report sounds a bit too austere. Feedback from the various groups. Now, the groups were, the identifiers are by numbers, are they, Ari?
Oh,
group,
groups.
Group 1, 2, 3?
Yeah.
All right. Can we, group 1. Now, this is, we left this up to the group to manage, so I don't know who's going to step up and provide the feedback. So deliberately, we stayed out of intervening to see whether it's a bit of an experiment, if you like. Let's see if somebody, who was in group 1? Hands up. No one. Group 1.
Group 1, raise hand.
Yes, raise hand. Group 1. Who was in group 1? Maybe I can't see him because there's a second. Group 1.
Hi, Professor. Not really sure, but I think it was our group. And it's Joanne who's going to present on our behalf.
Okay. Where's Joanne? Okay, Joanne, off you go.
I thought we are group 4.
John.
John?
I thought we are group 4.
Are we 4?
Yeah, you are
Not
group
really
4.
sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we are group 4.
Okay, just go ahead for group 4.
Just go ahead.
Yes,
Yeah,
John, go ahead.
This is Julius. We are in group 3. Group 3, Julius.
Okay, just
group 5. Group 5.
Sorry, group 4 was us, not.
Oh, group 5. Group 5.
Okay, so group 4, go ahead, and then group 3, Julius, your group. Okay, so 4.
Wait, group 4 is. No, never mind. I'll just start. So, how has COVID-19 affected our life or our world? or anything. So from Kainet side, so he wasn't able to travel abroad, and he's unable to attend his law summer school, but he was able to do a reflection on what he wants. Then for Saddam Hussein, COVID-19 has created a drama series. Then it create political and economic instability. So positively, he managed to spend more time with his family and also invest more time in his thesis. So for Michael Afolaami, the Peacebuilding internship was actually postponed due to COVID. So he has lost the internship and also his previous job. But he was also able to do some self-reflection and also do things that he never wanted to do earlier. So he actually learned a lot of new things in the meantime. So he was also concerned with the loss of livelihood and economy. So for Rafia Refish, COVID-19 is a great learning experience for her. So unfortunately, she lost some of her family members due to the COVID-19. So from time to time, she got constant anxiety when doing her thesis and courses during the pandemic. So for me, I had also the same thing. I had constant anxiety throughout the pandemic, especially during my fieldwork in the Philippines. So on the positive side, my livelihood is actually not much affected, but somehow I'm still worried of it. So in conclusion, we actually have learned and unlearned a lot, and it's a roller coaster ride for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Number 3, group 3. Group 2. Group 1. Group 5.
Maybe group 8.
Group 8.
Yes, yeah, group 1.
Where's the group 5?
Who's group 5?
Group 3 we can do?
Yes, Nandi.
Okay.
Group 3, go.
Sorry?
Yes, please. Group 3,
Yeah.
step up.
Yes. Group 3, it was me, Tuba, Inas, and Adabola. Adabola, I think, had some network issues, so could not interact. But Tuba, Inas, and myself, we had discussed how COVID-19 has changed this world for us, is that the world is not same. We've lost sense of time because we are in lockdowns constantly. So we've lost sense of time. We've lost sense of freedom also. Even if it's not lockdown and we're going out, we have, fear of getting back the infections. We're shying away from the social gatherings. And unemployment and the kind of corruption which is still there amongst politicians has left us, I would say, very, very sad and depressed, that if they're not still moved, then when are they going to change? The world is not same for us. It is more full of fear. We've lost family members, some dear ones, and we miss them dearly, and we wished it had not happened. So it is more fear, anxiety, and depression for all of us in the group.
Thank you. Now group 2. Now group 1. That's very interesting. Group, yes, Toshi.
I think I'm group 2, I think.
2. Okay.
I think.
Group 1.
All right, go. You got the stand.
So this is my reflection, personal reflection. It's a lot of learning. So for me, this was the COVID happened when I was looking for a job. Mm-hmm. So currently, my job is temporary, so it's not a full-time job. But I feel that I can have more time for myself because my work everything is online. I'm teaching through online. And that means I don't have to commute to school. So I definitely have like 1-2 hours less for commuting, which is good. Also, because of Zoom came in and it becoming a norm. Zoom or Teams, whatever you use, is becoming a norm. We did have Zoom before the pandemic, but we didn't use it this way. And thanks to this particular workshop is taking place now online, which is great. I can see people from all over the world in the screen, which is great. However, listening to my group members, I also learned it was also this difficult experience for one person. He couldn't fly back home for more than a year, and then another person so lots of loss of life, and also because kids are at home all the time, it's quite difficult to manage their work time and family time. That's something I learned. I also learned so many people lost their family members, and that's something I learned as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Toshi. Okay, group 5.
Group
6.
1.
Who's one? Julius, you're group number 1.
Group 1.
Please.
Yes, sir.
Please.
Okay, group 1, from group 1.
Yes.
Group 1 comprises of Concepcion, Christina, Manoj, and Muji.
Okay.
And we all concluded that COVID-19 has seized our freedom and separated families all around the world. We also agree that it has increased death mortality all around the globe. So we believe that it has claimed more lives than conflict. It exposes health system. Many nations have to struggle for their medical facilities, and some are still in the process of acquiring the latest equipment like oxygens and so on. It has exposed the health systems in 2 ways. One, lack of medical staff, and 2, expertise that will come up with a vaccine at a very let me say, from the beginning. So every nation are looking for a way out to get vaccinated, to get the latest equipment, and so on. We also believe that it has affected our educational system. So all around the world, we are unable to sit in classrooms to receive our classes as usual. So our last option is online. And we believe that in some 2 decades ago, when you have a degree online, it is questionable. Employee might ask you, how do you get a degree? Oh, I got a degree online. They would like to employ somebody who have a secular education. But today, online degree has been accepted all around the world because of this COVID. So this is what we agree. And we all agree that it has changed our world and in a way that we will never forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Julius. Thanks very much. Have we done group 5, I think? No. 6? Seven? We're running out of groups.
I think group 8 is next.
Now, Rem, what group are you?
I'm in group 8. So may I present?
There was a 8. Okay.
Okay. So because of the lack of the time, we are unable to share all the views of the different members of our group. So I think Karen has left out, and me, Nazib, and Ayat has shared, and quite a similar. Ayat and I shared quite a similar view, and Nazib has, point out from professional work point of view. So I'll just share collectively on behalf of ours. So like in this pandemic, I have realized a big thing in my life that we can live in a very minimalistic way. Minimalism is a part of our life. We can try to stick in living minimalistic way, because see, in this 1.5 year, I have realized that clothes, this thing, materialistic world is nothing, but only the basic essential things are required for us to live, like foods, the shelter we have. And for the extra that we have, we can share to the people. We should have the empathy and love for the others, to be able to coexist with each other in this world. And one thing is that we should never take for granted for what we have. We are so busy in our life that we are stick to our normal daily lives, doing certain chores that we often forget to love, to give love to our family members. But in this pandemic, I have realized that sticking with families and loving with each other and caring for each other is such a therapeutic thing for us. And from Naziba's point of view, the COVID-19 has extremely affected her in in pursuing her career. She was doing MPhil, and it has disrupted quite a lot in her studies. So I think this is very similar for all the professional professional work people they have gone through. So these are the few things that I want to share.
Thank you very much, Narim. Anybody else from the groups we left out, or for that matter, I think we've got 2 minutes.
Yes, I'm from group 9.
The group 9?
Yes.
The group 9. Oh, wow.
Would it be possible if I take some of the time to explain?
Now it's 9. Go on. Oh, well.
Okay,
I think our group, then it's number 4. This is what I remember when I entered the room. So it's the same group. So please go ahead and speak about our group.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I don't recall having Lillian in group 9.
No.
Okay.
You look better. Just go.
Okay.
Presented, please.
Okay, sure. I think I can go for group 9 first. We have Sarah, Alejandra, and Dilawar and Dr. Yassin in the group, including myself. So I think we can start off with how Dr. Yassin view COVID-19 changed his world. He said that it has changed in terms of the education side and health perspective, in which poor countries have difficulties in standing on their own, especially in terms of the classes, online classes, where not many people are able to join, like how we are right now. Connectivity issues, poverty issues also being highlighted by Alejandra. These are the things that we can see, the inequity that are exposed when it comes to COVID-19, the segregation. And I love how Alejandra emphasized on how it exposes our fragility in this life. Sarah also highlighted that there's a COVID-19 sort of built our resilient in this world, in a sense that we know what to expect, or how we should perceive these problems. And she also highlighted that in some ways or another, it limits our space in communicating with people. Although most of us really viewed that, or some of us in the group, such as Dilawar and Dr. Yassin, mentioned that although COVID-19 really brought up the negative aspects, it did have the positive aspect in which it brings people together, although to an extent that it's only face-to-face online. We are also able to connect with our family at home. How Dilawar also mentioned that he lost his job, maintenance is difficult, but and in his 2 years, he is unable to spend his time because of his professional work, but he's able to then spend his family time again during COVID-19, in that 5 to 6 months of COVID-19. And overall, I can conclude that our group really emphasizes on how COVID-19 really have the negative impacts on our life, but it also did have the positive impacts as well. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Alia. Thank you very much. Any other group that hasn't been represented?
Okay, I think we should end here.
Okay. So I'm going to mute myself.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Michalis. I think that's very interesting, very informative, and you've covered such a wide ground. So I just want to once again connect the presentation that Michalis had, his presentation, and I want to provide all of you a kind of like a map as to where we are heading. Now, we can perhaps look at dialogue as one of the items in our toolbox. So what we are providing you in this course is essentially a conceptual toolbox. It is also a map. So you begin by looking at all these different kinds of things that you are carrying in your toolbox, but it is also a map to assist you, to guide you. The destination that we have is peace. Okay, and that's why in the deep network, you'll find that the first word in the name of the network is dialogue. The first word is dialogue, and we believe very strongly that we begin on the premise that if we can sit down and communicate with one another, and then we go to the next step, which is empathic engagement. The way I see dialogue is that dialogue is essentially a process of rehumanizing the other, because what we have here is that in this world of ours, as humans, we are hardwired for empathy. In fact, we have the mirror neurons, as neuroscientists have presented to us, that we have these mirror neurons, and to be human is to be empathetic. And this kind of mirror neurons that in fact stimulates empathy, and this is why we are said to have this innate capacity to empathize, innate capacity to feel the pain of others, the innate capacity to feel the elation of others. So empathy actually makes us human, and this is an important thing to keep in mind. But what happens is that we have a political system, we have an economic system, and whatever kinds of cultural systems that we have, that tends to dehumanize the other. So when we look at violence right around the world, for example, in this fabulous book by Mohammed Mamdani, entitled "Why Victims Are Killers," and how victims become killers. When he looked at he's an anthropologist, and when he looked at the Rwandan crisis, and he found that why were Hutus and Tutsis, people who in fact knew each other, they were neighbors, how come they ended up killing each other? And then he pointed out that the way the one group dehumanized the other group, they didn't speak about them as being humans, but they spoke about them, referring to them as cockroaches and dehumanizing. So dialogue, really, by bringing people together to sit down, to make eye contact, to talk, to communicate their pain, to communicate their ideas, their interests, it actually helps us to once again become human. And this is essentially the process. And then once we have this empathic engagement where we rehumanize each other, then this is dialogue is an important, as I mentioned, a toolbox in this that helps us to reach the destination of peace. So yesterday, Jennifer Murphy talked to you about Lederach. And on page 21 in his little book on conflict transformation, this is what Lederach has said. Conflict transformation suggests that a fundamental way to promote constructive change on these levels, and the levels he's talking about, interpersonal, intergroup, and social structural, is dialogue. So he says that conflict transformation suggests that a fundamental way to promote constructive change on these levels is dialogue. And he says dialogue is essential to justice and peace on both an interpersonal and at structural level. But he also points out that it is not the only mechanism but it is an essential one. But later on in his book, Lederach points out that when we look at dialogue, we tend to think about dialogue as if like just sitting around the table and and talking to one another. But the focus has been on this communication through talk. But he also points out, as you remember yesterday, Jennifer Murphy said that silences can also communicate. And that is, the eye contact that we make with one another. And what he recommends is that a broader approach to dialogue, and it's not simply a technique-oriented approach that can happen in, direct face-to-face processes, but there are many ways of learning and deepening understanding. Dialogue as we talk is not the only path to understanding. We can promote and foster dialogue through music, the arts, rituals, dialogue as sports. Michalis is a football player and he all the time talks about football, but football itself can be a form of dialogue in the sense that we bring groups of people together and we try. And one of the projects that we actually had at the Center for Dialogue was to do with encouraging people to have sporting events. Fun and laughter and dialogue as shared work to preserve old city centers or parks. So dialogue can be bringing groups of people together. For example, one of the projects that we try to promote in the Deep Network is community garden as a form of dialogue, bringing people of different cultural backgrounds, getting them together with a purpose here. We were talking about purpose and interest, but here it can be a purpose in terms of planting organic food. But in the process, they are communicating with one another. The communication is rehumanizing. That person who is next to you, who you have always considered to be different from you, who is the other, is now, someone who is just like you, human, and someone who has the same kind of pain that you might have, experiences the pain, the person who has experiences similar kinds of joy. And so this is essentially this important dialogue is an important part of our toolbox. And now we look at the map in terms of how are we going to get to our final destination, peace, and not just peace among different people in this world of ours, but also peace with nature. And this is really, the journey in the sense. And here we have been providing you with the toolbox, but also a map towards this journey that is eventually going to take us to peace. So this is to connect what we have covered so far. And later, you have Sophia who's coming in the afternoon to complete some parts of this picture in terms of peace as a form of pedagogy, in terms of how we educate, people in terms of building peace or inculcating the value of peace and, respect for one another. All these are important kinds of, aspects so very important elements of this toolbox that I keep talking about, the metaphoric toolbox that we have. And I shall end there and leave it to my, colleague, Mas Ari.
Okay. Again, on behalf of ICCTP organizing team, we would like to say many thanks to Prof. Michalis to share his ideas, his experience, 20 years experience, on the dialogue. Yeah, and I'm sure it becomes a perspective, it's very significant perspectives for all the participants, because they also, it becomes the knowledge, the things that you share, of course, becomes their source of inspiration, and then to enhance their understanding for dialogue and many difference of dialogue, many understanding of dialogues. So again, thank you, Prof. Michalis, shall I say, Michalis, for your today's contribution. Okay, for the participant, we'll have a break now and we'll come back at 2 p.m. Okay, as a schedule. Again, see you soon at 2 p.m.
So, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.